Welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. For episode 128, we begin the book of Job. Now, the book of Job is interesting. It has kind of 4 different sections, maybe 5. We could probably say 5. So you've got kind of, I don't know, some people call it a play. I don't think it's a play. I think it's actually happening. Some people think that chapters 1 and 2 don't actually happen, that it's just kind of hyperbole. It's just a way to talk about it. I think it actually happens. So we're going to say it's not a play, all right? So you have the things that happen in heaven, and then you have Job's thoughts, and then you have his friends. There are 4 friends total. And then you have God and what God says to Job. And so these are the 4 major breakdowns of the book of Job. And you could say 5 if you break the friends into the 2 groups, where you had the 3 guys who all say the same thing, and then you have the young man who says some different things. But at any rate, 4 basic breakdowns of the book of Job. There's a lot of repetition in Job. Job is 42 chapters long, and we're not going to go through all of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these kind of 4 categories and hit the high notes, okay? So one of the things to consider here, let's look at Job chapter 1 and 2 in their entirety, because it sets up the rest of the story for us. Job chapter 1. Oh, by the way, if you're looking at where Job fits in the space of the Bible, it's really not in the middle of the Bible. This occurs somewhere around Genesis 11, and it's going to be after the Tower of Babel, okay? After the Tower of Babel, because there are languages and people have been divided. But historically, Job is the oldest book of the Bible, because remember, tradition tells us that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are the first 5 books of the Bible were written by Moses, and Moses will be much later. So Job is historically the oldest book of the Bible, chronologically falls in about halfway through Genesis chapter 11. So here we go. Job chapter 1, beginning in verse 1, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. So this is, remember, prior to the law, prior to priesthood, prior to Moses, prior even to Abraham, and this man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all the people in the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters and eat and drink with them. When the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their heart," and thus Job did continually. So his sons would throw a party, invite their sisters, and then when the days of the party were over, Job would make sacrifices on behalf of his children, saying just in case they've cursed God, in case they've cursed God in their hearts. So he was making sacrifices on behalf of his kids to God. Verse 6, now there was a certain day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Now, the word Satan in Hebrew it's used as a noun sometimes, but it can also be an adjective. And so the word Satan just means adversary. And it's hard for me to write and talk at the same time. So I think that's adversary so Satan just means adversary, but this is speaking obviously of an individual person. So we think that this is the proper noun Satan, right? Which is why it's capitalized in most text. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come from?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" So notice that God is the one who brings up Job. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side?" It's interesting to me how oftentimes people will pray and they'll say, "God, put a hedge of protection around us." I'm guessing they get it from right here, right? And Satan says, or God says to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? He's blameless, he's upright. There's no one like him who fears me." And he goes, "Yeah, it's because you've put a hedge of protection around him. Take away the blessing that he has, and then he'll curse you to your face." And it's interesting to me that people are like, "Man, God, put a hedge of protection around us," which isn't, I suppose, a bad thing to pray. But let's look at the whole of the story of Job and see what's going on here, because at the end of this story, Job is going to know God better than he does right now. He's going to have come to put his faith in God. And so Job, the result of this is going to be that Job comes to know God well. So Anyway, Satan says, have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? Verse 10 here, you have blessed the work of his hands and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has and he will curse you to your face. So the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand, only against him do not stretch out your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now, there was a day when the sons and the daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. There came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans came and took them and struck down all the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped. So the oxen and the donkeys, gone. That's the first thing. While he was yet speaking, there came another servant that said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone am the one to escape. So now the sheep are gone. While he was yet speaking, there came another one and said, the Chaldeans, this is the Babylonians eventually, formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. So the camels are now gone. While he was still speaking, there came another and said, your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are all dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So let's go back up here, and you'll see this. Let's see, here it is. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a lot of servants, many servants. He also had sons and daughters. So you have sheep, camels, oxen, donkeys, servants, and sons and daughters. You come down here, oxen, donkey, sheep. So oxen, donkeys, sheep, camels, and then sons and daughters, right? So sons and daughters. So everything that Job had, right? Everything that's highlighted for us in the beginning of this chapter, all of it, he's lost in a single day, all of it. And then Job arose, verse 20, Job arose and tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell upon the ground and worshiped. Notice that response. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Way to go, Job. Good job. Proud of you so far. Job chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and from the earth, walking up and down on it. The Lord said to Satan, again, it's the Lord doing this, have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, blameless and upright, who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast his integrity, even though you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, all that a man has he will give up for his own life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bones and his flesh, and he'll curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery to which to scrape himself, and he sat in the ashes. And his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. That's not the kind of wife you want around. That does not make things any better. But he said to her, you speak like a foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive good from God and not also evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Again, way to go, Job. And let me pause here, because people say, man, I want to be like Job. Now, Job is mentioned as a person of faith. We see him, I believe, in James 5. And Job is mentioned as a person of faith. He's mentioned as a righteous man. But here's the thing. He didn't sin with his lips yet, but he's about to charge God with fault. He's about to lay the blame at God. He's about to say, I'm upright. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. Why is all this happening to me? And so for these instances, he doesn't lay any blame at God. For these instances, he doesn't sin with his lips, but about 7 days later, he's going to. So it says this. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all the evil, all the harm that had come upon him, they came each from his own place. And we've got these first 3 friends. You got Eliphaz, the Timnite, Bildad, the Shuhite, and Zophar, the Naamite. These 3 friends are a little bit older. They're older guys. They all kind of speak the same thing, so they say the same thing. And then there'll be a younger guy that speaks later. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's see. See, I can't talk and write at the same time. They say the same thing, right? So these 3 guys are all there, these companions of Job. They've shown up to kind of like try to comfort him. And it says they made an appointment together to come and show him sympathy and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. This is how bad of shape Job is in. And they raised their voices and they wept and they tore their robes and they sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. And then they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. First of all, to be able to sit on the ground with your buddy for 7 days and 7 nights, that is something right there, because that's got to be uncomfortable and maybe a little bit cold at night and eventually a little bit stinky. But you've got these three guys. Now, what do we know of Job at this point? We know that Job is blameless. We know that he's upright. We know that he honors God. He fears God with his heart. We know that Job is the richest man in the land of Uz. He's the richest man in all the East. We know that in the matter of 1 day, he lost everything he had. We do not know how much later it is. It could be the very next day that Satan comes back before the Lord. But we know that Satan comes back before the Lord. The adversary comes back before the Lord. And then after that is given permission to harm Job's body, just not to cause his death. We know that twice it says that Job does not sin with his mouth. He honors God, even though after the second time, his wife is like, curse God and die. Why are you still holding fast your integrity? So he holds fast his integrity for 7 days, and then his friends show up, and all of this is happening to God. And there are a couple of things to consider. One, why is this happening? And I would argue that at least part of this is ultimately for Job's salvation, because Job, at the end of the book, comes to know God. Spoilers, but at the end of the book, he says, I had heard about you with the ear, but now I have beheld you with my eyes. I repent in dust and ashes. And so he comes into this knowledge of who God is. But there's so many things that Job is about to learn about God and the magnitude of God that will forever alter who Job is. And so the hedge is removed. Satan's allowed to harm Job, but not allowed to harm Job outside of the will of God. And it reminds me a little bit of 1 Samuel 24 and 2 Chronicles 21. Do I have that backwards? I do have that backwards. 2 Samuel 24 and 1 Chronicles 21, where David is incited by God to count the fighting men, but in another text it says that Satan incited David to count the fighting men. And so we see both of those kind of at play here. The other thing that's interesting to me is all of the host come, all the sons of God come to present themselves before the Lord. And we see this in a couple of different places. We'll also see this in 1 Kings 22, where we get kind of a picture into heaven, and we see all the host of God gathered around God. Why they are gathered there, why they're coming there to gather before the Lord, the Bible does not tell us, but Satan is there, and he's been walking to and fro upon the earth. And so that probably reminds you a little bit. So he says, where have you come from? He says, I've come from going to and fro on the earth. And that might remind you a little bit of 1 Peter that says, our enemy, the devil, roams around like a roaring lion, right? Seeking whom he may devour. So it might give you some of those kinds of vibes. But even though this is bad right now for Job, it's going to be very good. So hold on, keep going. We've got 3 more days of Job to look at, and we have some really cool stuff to unpack. And unpack, no T on the end of that. And I will see you next time. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible through another section of Scripture where we come to know and understand God a little bit better. Look, if you're brand new to Simpler Bible, we have all sorts of resources available for you. Go to our website, simplerbible.com, and there you can find these videos, you can find our podcast, you can find links to our social media, and you can even find a blog post with additional scriptures if you want to go into a little bit more study than we had time to cover in this podcast and video today. We hope that this tool will be exactly that for you, a tool. Not something that replaces your daily walk with God, but something that enhances your daily walk with God and helps you to know and enjoy Him more. Thank you so much for being part of this, and we'll see you again tomorrow.